heart stops in my chest. I will give nothing less than my absolute best.
What's up, guys? Tasha here. Welcome back for another Twisted Tea video. I hope that you all are having a fantastic day today. For those of you who are new here, welcome. I'm so glad that you have finally found us. If you are a fan of true crime, murder mysteries, serial killers, cults, or missing persons cases and haven't done so already, I highly suggest that you subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. I have a juicy case update for you guys today. There has finally been a suspect arrested in the murder case of Egypt Covington. This was a murder that happened in 2017, and there was a ton of media coverage on the case, but no one was ever arrested until just last month. This is a case that was really high on my list of unsolved cases that I wanted to cover, but it may finally be solved, and I am so excited to talk about it today. Because I haven't covered this case on my channel yet, I want to go over the entire case instead of just focusing on the new information and suspect, because the new suspect completely contradicts everything that the police have led the family and the public to believe up until this point. I wanted to give you guys a chance to hear this story out without forming any opinions beforehand. With all of that being said, let's dive right in. Jacqueline Egypt Covington was born and raised in Van Buren, Michigan, which is about 30 miles from Detroit. Egypt is always described as a caring, fun-loving person. She was a huge light in the lives of everyone that she associated with and had a huge personality.
She was a musician, she was a singer, she was a marketing representative, she was an aunt, she was a puppy mom, she was a light. Maybe a light is probably the easiest way to describe her because she was a radiant light everywhere she went.
Egypt absolutely loved all music and played several different instruments and had an amazingly beautiful voice. While Egypt loved to play and sing all kinds of different genres of music, she really liked to sing the blues the most. Egypt had been a bartender at a bar called Fraser's Pub for a while and was perfect at it. If you've ever bartended or ever even been to a bar, you know that the bartender needs to be lively, personable, and friendly, and they need to be able to get along with just about anyone. And that was exactly how anyone who knew Egypt has described her. Egypt was always really close to her family and had been dating a man named Curtis Meadows for 10 years off and on. Curtis had a young daughter from a previous relationship, and while Curtis and Egypt had been in love for a decade, something had always gotten into their way, and they had mutually agreed to break up several times over the years. Like I said, Egypt had been a bartender for years, so she worked at night, and Curtis's work schedule conflicted with hers, and he had a daughter that needed his attention on his downtime from work. So they were on opposite schedules and found it hard to find time for each other, but with Egypt's new job, she and Curtis were finally on the same schedule and rekindling their relationship. Egypt and Curtis had finally started to settle down, and Curtis was set to move in with Egypt just a week after all of this happened. On June 22, 2017, Egypt had spent the day and evening with her friend shopping and just hanging out. Egypt had planned to spend some time with her friend and then go home and spend the rest of her evening cleaning and making room for Curtis to move in. Egypt invited her friend to come back to her house with her and help, but the friend declined because she had to work early the next morning. So after their yoga class, the two friends went their separate ways. This would be the last time that Egypt Covington would be seen alive. So that evening, while Egypt was getting ready for the next chapter in her relationship, she was home alone and holding text conversations with several different people. Around 10 p.m., Curtis texted Egypt and told her goodnight, and she replied, "Nighty-night." Curtis didn't realize at that time that this would be the last time that he would hear from the love of his life. The next morning, Curtis tried to reach out to Egypt and tell her good morning as he always did, but he wasn't getting a response back from her. He tried to call a few times and texted a few more times throughout the day, but Egypt still wasn't replying, and this wasn't like her at all. He started to get an eerie feeling. On his way home from work, he decided to pop in and check on her and make sure that everything was okay. He was hoping that she had gone out to run some errands and forgotten her phone at home, which wasn't likely because her phone might as well have been sewed to her hand, but it was the easiest explanation that he could come up with. When Curtis arrived at Egypt's house to check on her, his heart sank a little more. He noticed that her car was in the driveway, If her car was in the driveway, she couldn't have left to run errands without her phone. Curtis then parked his car and made his way to the front door. He knew something was very wrong as he approached it because the door was cracked. Curtis yelled for Egypt a few times and got no response, so against his better judgment, he entered the house. Egypt's dog Ruby came running to him. Apparently, Ruby was always very friendly and made friends with anyone that Egypt made friends with. She was always jumping on Egypt's friends and licking them, but on this day, Curtis thought that Ruby seemed to be scared.
I took a step in, 2 steps, and I yelled her name, Egypt, and her dog, Ruby, barked. Usually when you see Ruby, she just can't wait to like jump in your lap and kiss you, but she just looked at me, made eye contact, and turned around like, follow me.
So he did, and Ruby led Curtis to Egypt's body. When police got to the crime scene, they found 27-year-old Egypt Covington bound by Christmas lights and deceased from 1 gunshot wound to the back of her head.
She was bound with her hands behind her back in a fetal position, laying on the ground, blood covering her head. And, you just know she's gone. It was the worst day of my life. The beginning of it.
The officers thought that the crime scene seemed odd. There were no signs of forced entry, and her hands and feet had been bound with Christmas lights, but it was the middle of June. There were no signs of a struggle or a robbery, and police were positive that this was a personal attack by someone that Egypt knew and was comfortable with. It seemed as if she had willingly let this person into her home. Egypt was a feisty woman who was 5'10" and could bench over 200 pounds. Her family said that she wasn't easily scared and would have fought for her life. They were sure that the attack had taken her completely off guard, and the single gunshot wound to the back of the head supported that theory. Per usual, the Van Buren Township Police assumed that it was Curtis who had murdered Egypt. Not only was he her longtime boyfriend, who was supposed to finally be making a huge commitment by moving in with her only a week after her body was found, but he was the person who found her body and called 911 on that fateful day. We all know that the significant other is almost always the first person of interest. It seemed plausible at first. Police thought that the fact that Egypt was expecting him to move in with her in just a week was his motive. They thought that maybe Curtis had gotten cold feet, and they were completely convinced that Egypt knew her attacker, because there was no evidence that she didn't. Curtis quickly became the first person of interest, and within 3 days of Egypt's murder, he was questioned several times and had taken a polygraph test, and they were able to rule him out pretty quickly. It's really sad that he had to go through all that immediately after finding the love of his life the way that he did. But the most critical time in a murder investigation is in the first 48 hours, so they knew that they had to jump on him and interrogate him quickly if they wanted to solve this case and/or rule him out. After police started to realize that it may not have been Curtis who murdered Egypt, they started to dig a little deeper into her life because, again, they were sure that it had to be someone that she knew and knew well. Investigators quickly learned about a man that Egypt had a previous relationship with during one of the breaks that she had taken from Curtis. Egypt had had a brief relationship with a man named Kenny, and he was very controlling and possessive with her. Egypt had complained to her family and friends that he was constantly belittling her and would push and shove her. On one occasion, he even cornered her and punched the wall beside of her head. Kenny had even slept with a number of women that Egypt had looked at as friends. And while they were at a wedding one time, Kenny forcefully shoved her against a wall and the police were called. Egypt never pressed charges because the wedding party had made her feel guilty for having the police at the wedding reception in the first place, as if it was her fault. So Egypt eventually decided that she was going to end things with Kenny, and Kenny didn't take it too well. He seemed to be in denial at first and would still call Egypt and show up at her house and job randomly. She was constantly having to remind him that she was not interested in even being friends with him at that point. When Kenny found out that Egypt was back with Curtis, he completely lost it. He started to stalk Egypt, and one day when Egypt was spending time at Curtis's house, Curtis looked out the window and noticed that Kenny's truck was parked in his driveway behind Egypt's car. Kenny was walking around circling Egypt's car and looking in all of the windows before jumping in his truck and speeding off. When Egypt confronted Kenny later, he told her that he was only parked there because he was driving past and noticed that the sunroof in her car was open, so he stopped to close it for her. Egypt had told her sister about this incident and all of the other incidents with Kenny, and told her that she felt like she had to tell Kenny that Curtis was going to move in with her. Egypt's sister told her not to tell Kenny and said that it was none of his business. But Egypt was just such a kind, good-hearted person that she really felt like she had to tell him for some reason. Just a week before Egypt's body was found, she had confided in her stepmom and said that she was scared to tell Kenny, but felt like she had to do this. So naturally, Kenny became the second person of interest, and the case came to a standstill at that point. Kenny was very cooperative and had a pretty solid alibi. They couldn't find any evidence that he was involved. So police started to look into Egypt's neighbors. She lived in a duplex and had told a few friends that she didn't feel safe at her home alone because she thought that her neighbors were dealing drugs out of the house. She had complained that there were people in and out of the other side of the duplex at all hours of the day and night. Police were able to find that the neighbors were out of town on the night of Egypt's murder, and it didn't make sense that someone who came to the duplex would attack Egypt next door. Then the police thought that maybe someone who had seen her out or heard her sing became obsessed with her and followed her home. But that was only speculation. They couldn't find any evidence of that either. They were really just fishing at this point. But authorities said over and over that they were sure that this was someone that Egypt knew and knew well. On the 3-year anniversary of Egypt's murder, her family and friends protested for the Van Buren Police Department to step aside and let Michigan State Police take over the investigation. Egypt's family had been trying to get the state police to take over the case for a while, but the Van Buren Police Department kept refusing to hand the case over, saying that they had a handle on the case. But it had been 3 years. The family was rightfully becoming increasingly more and more impatient as the weeks, months, and now years passed. They wanted and needed answers for closure. Egypt's brother was quoted saying, "It should be all hands on deck. Let's all get together and solve this," meaning that the two police departments should come together. So on Monday, June 22nd, the 3rd anniversary of Egypt's death, Egypt's family and friends did just that. They protested. A group of people got together at 6 p.m. and walked to the Public Safety Department right past the Van Buren Police Department. They rallied to urge the Michigan State Police to get in on the case. The goal of the march was to send the message that Egypt's family and friends weren't going to give up or stop putting pressure on the police department.
Why would a police department not want to open the case to others that are in the field that can help them?
I mean, is she lying? I'm most definitely not saying that police officers are all bad. Don't come for me. But there are seriously so many instances where shoddy police work or stupid egos get in the way of an investigation and ultimately justice for the victim. Or they'll even sway an investigation in a specific direction after they get their mind made up about a person of interest. They'll get blinders on and only look in that direction. It frustrates me. Anywho, I read an article on fox2detroit.com where Egypt's mother was interviewed saying that the Van Buren Police Department was keeping her completely out of the loop. She claimed that the police department would only speak with Egypt's father, and because they were divorced and estranged, that meant that Tina was out of the loop.
One detective tried to bully me on the phone and tell me I'm messing up this investigation. So maybe they messed up.
She says the only person who gets updates regularly is Egypt's father, who now lives out of state.
It's the last thing I do. I'm going to make sure no other mother that's been divorced or separated from the family will ever go through this again.
Now, in addition to her quest for justice, she's in the process of helping to write Egypt's law to give family members of victims more access to the investigation. Her hope is a collective voice will be heard by someone who knows something about Egypt's murder.
That is pretty badass. I love a relentless mother who takes that anger and just darkness after something like this happens to one of their babies and turns it into something beautiful in her own way. It's just amazing when they go that extra mile to get justice for their babies. That's how the Amber Alert was put into place, and teaser, the video about Amber Hagerman, the little girl who inspired the Amber Alert, is coming soon. I'm not sure what information she's trying to get written into that law, but I wanted to bring that up. Good for her. You go, mama. So now that all of that is out of the way, on to the twist and the good news. After that protest and march on the 3rd anniversary of Egypt's murder and her vigil, the Michigan State Police finally got involved and was working with the Van Buren Police Department. They finally began to make some progress. And on November 5th, 2020, the Michigan State Police arrested 2 people in connection to Egypt's murder. 6 days later, on the 11th, the second person of interest was released. No information at all has been released to the public about that second suspect. And originally, Egypt's family didn't know who was in custody. Egypt's family had been told for years that the attack was not random and that the police were sure that this was someone that Egypt knew and had let into her apartment because, again, there were no signs of forced entry. Still in custody is 34-year-old Timothy Eugene Moore. Timothy Moore is from Toledo, Ohio, which is about an hour from Van Buren, and Egypt had no connection to him that anyone has been able to find. At the time of me recording this video, investigators aren't giving a motive. At this point, Timothy Moore is being charged with first-degree murder, felony murder, first-degree home invasion, felon in possession of a firearm, and 4 different felonies pertaining to that firearm. I've read in a couple of different places that Timothy Moore shouldn't have been free and roaming the streets when Egypt was murdered because he had been charged with yet another felony right beforehand. Moore has been charged previously in Michigan for various gun crimes, drug dealings, and breaking and entering. There was never any information released about that suspect, and the Michigan State Police have announced that the second suspect was released and is not being charged at all. Maybe they just didn't have enough evidence at this point to charge him or her, and now Timothy Moore will talk in an effort to help get his own sentence reduced. Maybe that second suspect will end up being arrested and charged in the long run. If Timothy Moore is a career criminal and convicted felon, his DNA should definitely be in the database, right? I'm thinking that it was most likely DNA that finally linked him. He's supposedly just a random person that Egypt didn't know. So if there was no DNA, how did they find him after so long? But if there was DNA, why did it take them so long? I'm not sure if it was DNA that linked him. That's just what makes the most sense to me. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. What do you guys all think? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. I will definitely be making update videos on this case as details are released. If you haven't done so already, please remember to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss those updates. And please like this video if you think it's worth liking. It really helps the video and my channel succeed, so I really appreciate that. Merry Christmas, guys, and Happy New Year. I'll see you all down in the comments. Peace and love.
Where'd you go? I miss you so. Seems like it's been forever since you've been gone. Where'd you go? I miss you so. Seems like it's been forever since you've been gone. Please come back home.